Thank you, Daria. And thank you everyone for having me join you today. I really feel energized by the power from the women's strike video and of course from our speakers here today. The work that you're all doing here today is wonderful, and you can feel that solidarity through the screen. So thank you. Greetings, everyone. I'm happy to be here to speak with you on behalf of the Canadian Union of Public Employees on the topic of gender and intersectionality in the LRG sector. I'm also pleased to be joining you today from Winnipeg, Manitoba, my home in Canada, which is on Treaty 1 territory. This is an Indigenous land acknowledgement that I share from my region, which are the original homelands of the Anishinaabe Cree people, the OG Cree, Dene, and Dakota folks, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. I'm very proud to come from Treaty 1 territory. So to put it into context, and thank you, Daria, it is a priority for CUPE, which is the Canadian Union of Public Employees, CUPE, to ensure that our activism and organizing is intersectional at the core. We have a long history of pushing for equity, improving working conditions for all workers, including those of us who are two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, or intersex. At CUPE, we've been fighting to end homophobia and transphobia for over 50 years in the union. Our efforts to address LGBTI workers must also require work to dismantle the other forms of oppression as well that workers, including queer and trans workers, face. And so what this means is that while fighting homophobia, we also fight racism. And while fighting biphobia, we also fight ableism. And we include trans women in all our efforts to fight sexism. And so we know that as workers, we have more than just one identity, and that intersectionality piece. So our efforts to fight for workers must address all of us in all of our diversity. So I'll start by sharing some of the work that we've done over the years to ensure that workplaces, as well as local public services, are gender transformative and non-discriminatory. And then I'll tell you a little bit about the current challenges and work that we're still needing to do as a labor movement. We began negotiating non-discrimination protections for gay and lesbian workers in the 1970s. And I should say that at that time, it was really specific to just gay and lesbian people. We hadn't yet begun to push for trans rights or intersex rights or the rights of other queer people. We also didn't have the term intersectionality in use, but gay and lesbian activists did find solidarity from women and Black activists in the union. Local government workers were actually at the forefront of our early efforts to enshrine gay rights in collective agreements. And in 1973, actually, CUPE members in the city of Toronto pushed to have sexual orientation included in the city's anti-discrimination policy. And activists had initially tried to get support for the policy through City Council, through all of those avenues. But when elected politicians refused, they went through their union. And this is where we see that union strength. By the end of the year, locals representing inside and outside local government workers, as well as library workers, became the first in Canada to have a policy protecting gays and lesbians from discriminatory firings and wage discrimination. It was, and often still is, the case that workers in the local government sector were able to win progressive victories before workers in federal or provincial industries, and even the private sector. It's likely that LGBTI people often found community in large urban centers as well, and were able to bring some of these issues to the local government level before those regional and national governments were even willing to accept them as persons. The activism of gay and lesbian local government workers spread throughout the 1980s and the 90s, and CUPE locals started advocating for workers living with HIV and AIDS and negotiating healthcare benefits for same-sex couples. So again, though, it was at this local government workers level that took up this fight, and that's important to note. In 1987, CUPE challenged the denial of medical and dental benefits to a CUPE member's partner at the Supreme Court of Ontario. The court ruled against her, but the case was important for laying the groundwork to eventually win same-sex health and pension benefits across the country. If it wasn't the activism for LGBTI workers, I don't think I would be sitting in front of you myself as a first openly out LGBTI president of CUPE Manitoba today. And this is where we get to. These are the incredible successes. And as the years progressed, trans activists in our movement and in the union movement pushed CUPE to get more involved in the struggle for trans rights as well. In the year 2000, a CUPE activist was instrumental in getting the City of Toronto District School Board to become the first public school board in Canada to add gender identity protection for students and staff to its human rights policy. And shortly after that, we had a local win paid leave for transitioning workers. So for this work to spread, though, and especially for local government workers outside of major city centers, we know that they need resources. Union education programs have been central to helping activists develop the knowledge and skills they need to understand intersectionality and also to effectively advocate for trans members. Through advocacy at the bargaining table, as well as at the government level, we were able to get gender identity protections added to employer policies, collective agreements, as well as human rights legislation in Canada. Now, at the bargaining table, we are still working on language to amend employer uniform and dress code requirements that oftentimes are discriminatory against trans and gender non-conforming workers. And we have to make sure that employer benefit plans adequately cover the healthcare that our community needs. So, for example, employer plans often have insufficient coverage for the reproductive technologies that help queer people build families and for HIV prevention and treatment medications, for example. And far too many trans and non-binary workers are denied access to gender-affirming healthcare because their public health care may be inadequate and their employer benefit plan does not cover all of the procedures. So for local government workers, their access to gender-affirming healthcare can vary significantly. Those living in Montreal, for instance, are mostly able to access care locally. So this is where workers in cities and towns in other regions are often forced to travel to access care and simply can't afford to take the time off work without transition leave built into that agreement. In recent years, CUPE has created collective agreement checklists, and I know, Mitch, you mentioned that too around fact sheets, guideposts for us, but checklists and bargaining guides are really important so that locals can negotiate improvements for LGBTQ2+ workers, and also to ensure that everyone has access to the care and medications that they need. Too often, the oppression, hatred, exclusion of workers and what they face is at the hands of other workers. So we need to be providing education to all workers, including our own members on homophobia and transphobia. We train our shop stewards and at the level of all levels, like Mitch was talking about as well, and elected leaders as well on equity and inclusion. And we offer several workshops on addressing oppression in the workplace. We have created fact sheets on gender diversity, and inclusive pronoun use, which I know helped many union members understand how to be stronger allies for trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people, as well as we join online together, and how we can share our pronouns through our name badges here. So in an effort to further address the oppression experienced by our community, CUPE released a groundbreaking study with the Carleton University here in Canada and a national LGBT organization called EGAL, and we'll share that in the chat as well. EGAL looked at the experiences of LGBTQ2+ people, as well as older adults accessing services, but also working in public services in Canada. The study you'll found that working conditions for LGBTQ2+ workers are related to service conditions for LGBTQ2+ clients, so those accessing services as well, and vice versa. The report also identified several promising practices to create safer environments for LGBTQ2+ workers and clients, including employment equity, cultural competency standards that were tied to funding, and increasing LGBTQ2+ representation on governance boards. The report calls on policymakers to address the specific concerns of marginalized groups within LGBTQ2+ communities, but also noting that the perspectives of racialized, Black, trans, Indigenous persons with disabilities, as well as low income, are often too overlooked. So we expect that the research and the recommendations to advance the fight here for LGBTQ2+ safety everywhere, whether that be convincing governments and municipalities to ban conversion therapy, or ensuring that elderly people don't have to go back into the closet when they access long-term care at a certain point in their life. This is the type of work that we can continue to do. And as public sector workers, we know the importance of public services in improving the lives of everyday people at the core. We also know that public services need to be safer and accessible for those most vulnerable members of our LGBTQ2+ community, such as seniors, racialized people, people living with disabilities. The report will show you that the conditions of work are the conditions of service provision. And so where LGBTQ2+ workers are safer, so are public service users, right? And if we're going to continue to fight unapologetically for meaningful change, which we have always done, and we do here together today, then we need to shift that power to diverse LGBTQ2+ worker communities as well. It should never be acceptable that the barometer of safety for local government workers in one city is higher than for local government workers in another city. Or that gay men who are white and cisgender can feel safe from employment discrimination, when so many trans women, especially those who are Black and Indigenous, still struggle to find and keep decent work. So to summarize, I think, activists in Canada have made significant progress in recent decades, but we still have a long way to go. And improving public services starts with improving the conditions of public service work for everyone, no matter where they live. So thank you. Merci.